Hey, welcome back everyone, and thank you for joining me once again for another tutorial from Manny School of Art. Today I want to show you a technique that's actually very easy to learn, and it's a technique that you can use when you want to add shadows to your ink drawings, but you don't want to do scribbling, stippling, or ink washes. It's super easy to learn, and with just a little bit of practice you could get some pretty incredible results. Best of all, if you're already using brushes to do your inking, you don't need to get any additional supplies, because all you need for this technique is some simple brushes that you probably have laying around, some black India ink, and some coarse watercolor paper. That's it. This technique is called dry brushing. So super easy to learn. I'm going to show you how to do that, but what I've done is I've broken this video down into two sections. The first section is just a little recap so that you can see how I did ink washes for the background, and I used a brush to do some line work. Okay. If you're already comfortable with those two techniques, just go ahead and skip over to the dry brushing portion of the video. Okay. If you're finding this video helpful, others might as well. So give it a share, give it a like, and if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. All right, let's go ahead and get started. All right, to get ready for this painting, what I did is I transferred one of my pencil drawings using my light table onto some coarse watercolor paper. Once I had the main portion of it transferred, I went ahead and did all of my web design using cross contours to make sure that the web followed the muscles and the forms of the body. Next thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that I secure the paper onto a backing board. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to be saturating the paper when I do the background, and I want to make sure that as it dries that it kind of flattens itself out again. So this is just a strong piece of cardboard with some 1-inch masking tape. All right, little buddy, I need that water. Now, using my large watercolor brush, I went ahead and saturated the paper and allowed the paper to sit for about 5 minutes, making sure that the water was absorbed thoroughly before moving on to the next step. While the paper is still wet, I want to start adding the ink around the edges and allowing the water to do some of the mixing for me, but I'm also going to help it along a little bit in certain areas with my large watercolor brush. Now I want to do this step while the paper is nice and wet so that I have time to blend and soften the ink pretty much any way that I want. So the watercolor paper being fully saturated allows me to do this relatively quickly. So here I'm using a clean, large watercolor brush, and I'm just kind of moving the ink around. Now I decided that the bottom needed just to go a little bit darker because that's where the main character is fading towards. So I added a little bit more of the black ink and then just kind of moved it around with the big brush. Now that the background is done, I want to set this aside overnight and just let it dry naturally. And then we'll be ready to go the next day. Alright, it's time to start inking the character. Now before I start using my brush on the character, I always take a few minutes to warm up. I practice doing some thin lines, some thicker lines, some broken lines, some straight lines, some curved lines, just to get a feel and kind of get back into the habit of brushing or line work with a brush. Once I'm ready to go, then I'll start working on the character. I'm going to be thinking about the light source as I do this. Anywhere where I think there's going to be a shadow, I want to make sure that I thicken the weight of the line. And anywhere where I think there might be a highlight, I want to keep the lines relatively thin. I take my time as I do this step, working mostly from left to right so that I always have a nice dry place to place my hand. Keep it nice and steady as I'm working with these brushes. I'm working with a number 2 sable brush, and it has a really nice bounce back, so it allows me to very easily change the weight of the lines to make some lines a little bit thicker and keep some lines really nice and fine. I'll be using the same brush to fill in any of the larger dark areas that need to be pure black. And then we'll be ready to start working with the dry brushing. All right, so let's take a look at what dry brushing actually is. Dry brushing is nothing more than putting a very thin layer of paint onto a rough surface, and you want the pores of the paper to actually remain relatively white while the raised areas of the paper will turn black. So typically what I do is I load up my brush with pure ink, and on a scrap piece of paper like this, I remove the extra. And then all you want to do is you just want to really just skim the surface of the paper. So I'm not actually adding water to the ink to make it light. I'm letting the white of the paper kind of show through the black in between the ink, right? So the pores are actually remaining white while the raised areas are receiving the ink and getting darker. Make sure that when you're doing this that you're using pure ink. Don't add any water to it. If you do, it'll seep into the pores and then you'll lose the effect. Let's try a bristle brush. Same thing. You're going to load it up with pure ink. Wipe off the extra. And then just start skimming the surface. And of course, you can change the shape of the brushes. So this one is a filbert brush, but you can do it with round brushes, you can do it with flat brushes, depending on the effect you're trying to get. So here you can clearly see, you can really see the white of the paper showing through. So it gives the illusion of gray, but we're not adding water to this, so we're just working with pure black against pure white. So let's add a little bit more here. And there you go. And then let's try the all natural brush. If you do have to clean your brush, make sure that you dry it thoroughly. Otherwise, the water that's in the brush will mix with the ink and you'll get a gray, and that's not what we're looking for. So again, this is a natural bristle, and it's sable. And because the sable is so much softer, you do have to layer it a little bit more because it takes up so little ink, and you don't want to scrub with sable brushes because you don't want to damage them. Okay, so when you're doing this, I like to start from the shadow side and work my way towards the light source. So if the light source is coming this way, then I'm going to start dry brushing on this side, following the contours of the object, right? So I know that this is a rounded object, so my strokes are going to follow those curves. On this side, very little. So I removed a little bit more from my brush and then just barely touch this edge. Now I want to make this area a little bit darker, so I reload my brush, wipe off the extra, and then start to build it up. I always build up from the shadows and skim it towards the light source. And this works best if the paper you're working with is nice and rough, so that you have some nice, you have the deep pores, but then you also have the raised areas that pick up the ink very easily. And that's how dry brushing is done. It's very easy, a little time consuming, but it's a great technique when you want to keep working with ink, but you don't want to switch over to like stippling or scribbling or cross-hatching. Okay. So let's take a look at what that looks like on Spiderman. All right, so remember we're going to be working with pure ink, so you want to have some scrap paper, right, because you have to remove the extra ink. Do not get this wet, okay? And start working from the light, from the shadows towards the light source. The light source is going to be on this side. So I'm going to take this and I'm just going to start skimming the surface. And I want to think about this form, which is basically a sphere, right? So as I'm doing this, I'm going to start curling my brush strokes. Every time you reload, remember to remove the extra, okay? And then just gradually build it up. And eventually, this actually becomes really fast and it's easy to control. As long as you start off with the lighter values, right? Because you can always go back and add more layers. So if you start off too dark and you change your mind, whiteout is not going to help you, not with this technique. So it's better to plan ahead and build it up slowly. And I like to use one of my lesser quality brushes. I don't like to work with my sable brushes when I do this because there is some gentle scrubbing that has to take place, and I don't want to take the chance on ruining my my expensive brushes. So I'm using, this one is a synthetic brush, but it's a decent quality and it works really, really well. Super soft pressure. Allow the raised areas of the paper to pick up the black and the pores of the paper to stay white. And that's it. It's super easy to do. Does take a little time, but if you don't want to do stippling or cross-hatching, then this might be a good alternative. So I'm going to go ahead and kick this into high gear and then show you what it looks like when it's done. All right, so this is what we got so far. Overall, it's starting to look pretty good, but I feel like this area right here is too bright, and I want to fade these even more into the darkness, and I want to darken up the midsection, especially on this side here. So, but this side over here with the light, the midtones look pretty good. So I'm just going to finish this up, and then we'll call it a day. All right, so I got this thing up on an easel right now so that I could work on it from a distance so I can kind of get a better idea of what I'm looking at. And I tried doing a little bit with the bristle brush. There we go. And I think I said I want to go a little bit stronger here. And then start really just very, very gently putting in slightly darker shadows. So the bristle brush holds a lot of paint, a lot of ink. So you'll see me scrub it just to remove some, because what I don't want to do is I don't want to go in here with pure black, but I do want to strengthen these shadows. Yeah, I like that better, a lot better. So to recap, whenever you're doing the dry brush technique, remember that you're working with pure ink. You're not adding any water to it. You have to do it on coarse watercolor paper or any type of rough surface, because you want the pores to stay light and the raised areas to pick up the black ink. And most importantly, be sure to build up your shadows gradually so that you can control the intensity of the shadows. All right, guys, I think I'm going to call this one done. I would love to hear your comments down below. Let me know what you think of the finished product. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next episode.